I think I'm going to start this off. Welcome, everyone. Hello, good evening. Welcome. My name is Diane Baum. I am a member of the Acton Area League of Women Voters Steering Committee. I would like to warmly welcome everyone here tonight and express my appreciation to you on behalf of the Acton Area League for choosing to spend the next hour and 15 minutes with us. We are excited to bring you this panel discussion on the state of open town meeting and weighing alternatives to local governance. This webinar is being recorded. A link will be made available on the Acton Area League website. The recording will also be available on cable television stations in Acton Area League towns, which include Acton, Boxborough, Hudson, Littleton, Maynard, and Stowe. The idea for this webinar arose out of the Acton Area League's report on town meeting, published in June of 2024, which summarizes a year's worth of data gathering, reflection, and debate. For the report, we looked back at 20 years of open town meeting attendance in Acton Area League towns with easy to read charts that show attendance volatility by town. And we updated the lists of efforts towns are making to increase accessibility, meeting efficiency, and voter education. Massachusetts towns are increasingly pushing for legislation on the state level to modernize open town meeting. So we included a section on the pros and cons of hybrid meetings with remote voting, currently not permitted under Mass General Law. Lastly, we looked at the two other types of legislative bodies permitted under state law, representative town meeting and councils, with pros and cons and a brief section speaking to why is it that towns decide to change their local governance structure. Our finding was that open town meeting, though imperfect, comes closest to the democratic ideal of direct participatory governance with authority vested in the people who directly participate in the process and vote. Our next steps are to inform and engage our communities. We hope this event will be the beginning of community conversations in your towns. I'm now going to turn it over to Joanne Berry, who serves as the Town of Acton's Open Town Meeting moderator and will serve as the moderator for tonight's webinar.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. I am also a member of the Acton Area League of Women Voters Steering Committee and did participate to some degree on this study. But here we are this evening. As Diane said, we'll be here for about an hour and 15. So we have about an hour's worth or so of conversation amongst our panelists, and then some time for question and answer. If you have a question that you would like us to address, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please send it through that. And before you ask your question, see if it's already there and give it the thumbs up. If you have a similar or same question, there's a way to do a thumbs up. Just hit the thumbs up thing. So that will tell us that more people are interested in this particular question, if that happens. So yes, so it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for this evening. And of course, I don't think you will see them until they speak, because I think the way we're setting up the panel is so that you'll see the speaker taking up the full screen. So we have with us tonight, Mark DeSalvo is the town moderator of North Andover and is currently the president of the Massachusetts Moderators Association. North Andover has open town meeting. We also have Jerry Slater, who is the town moderator of Norwood, and they have a representative town meeting. We also have Pat Lloyd, a staff member from the Collins Center of UMass Boston, focusing on municipal management and human resources. Before joining the center, she practiced law in the fields of labor and employment, civil rights, and constitutional law, and is also a town meeting member in Reading, which apparently has a representative town meeting. And then finally, we also have Bill Rosenblum, who is a member of the select board of Ludlow and served on the charter commission that proposed the change from town meeting to town council. So we will learn more about that when we get to that portion of the forum. So starting right off, and the participants know what we're going to talk about. This isn't like a candidate forum where we expect people to just answer questions. So the first topic is, could you briefly describe for Mark open town meeting and for Jerry representative town meeting from voters in your town, What aspects of town meeting do they like and what parts do they dislike? What initiatives have you seen in either open or representative town meeting that have engaged the public? For open town meeting, what is the typical attendance and attendance for hot button issues? And for representative, what is the process for voters who are not town meeting members to engage? So we'll, if there's any question about what the questions are, we can go back to that. But let's start off with Mark and talking about open town meeting.
Well, thank you very much for the privilege. First, let me say that your study was a really interesting tome, very, very well done, and as a template for thoughtful discussion around these issues. Town meeting, open town meeting most specifically, is a 400-year tradition of local participatory democracy that Thomas Jefferson jealously characterized that town meeting is, quote, the perfect exercise of self-government and the wisest invention ever devised by wit of man. Whether true or not, I'll suggest that town meeting is the worst of all forms of government, except for all others. And it's really interesting that Thomas Jefferson talks about the wit of man because much has changed for the better, of course, about town meeting. One needed to be a land-owning male, of a certain religion in order to participate in town meeting 400 years ago. Thankfully, that's changed, but it's only been 106 years since women were provided the right to vote in our nation. That all power is in the room at open town meeting, I think, is the most important factor of town meeting in terms of it having resonance within a community. And that the legislative nature of a deliberative conversation is both the most appealing and the least appealing part of open town meeting. People love it and at the same time hate the strictures of a legislative body and the consideration at the time that it takes. Directly to your question, I've conducted meetings of up to 3,000 people and typically have 1,200 to 1,800 and conduct all business in one evening. I like to characterize my meetings as a template for being fair, open, and efficient. I allow several innovations that might be of interest to our participants today. One is that I allow remote participation in our open town meeting. I don't allow people to vote because the law does not allow that, but I allow them to contribute. And we've all experienced, whether a representative town meeting or an open town meeting, the magic, the real majesty of, in a moment, somebody getting up and asking a query or making a statement that totally changes the tenor in a room that you might have anticipated. And that's why I'm a big supporter of at least some limited remote participation, because while all power, is in the room, not all knowledge happens to be in the room.
Point. So Jerry, some thoughts about representative town meeting.
All right. So again, thanks. Thank you so much to the League for having me. And I agree with Mark that I think the study and this conversation in particular is timely and one that is happening all over the Commonwealth for that matter. So representative town meeting, slightly different. Many of the things that Mark said can apply to RTM or representative town meeting. In the case of Norwood, where I'm from, we elect representatives from all 9 of our voting districts. And we are electing actually, we just changed it. We were at 1.5% of registered voters. We've now gone down to, by vote of town meeting, as a matter of fact, a bylaw change, 1.25% of registered voters, which roughly works out to be 29 seats per district and 261 elected town meeting members. The big difference is in representative town meeting, you are elected by the people in your district. You have to get your signatures to get yourself on the ballot. So you're making a commitment, and you're making a consistent commitment to attend no matter what the issue may be that is going to be discussed or issues are going to be discussed. The reality is some people, and I can use myself as an example, that I originally ran for town meeting because of an issue with the schools that concerned me. I ended up staying and really got into the process of town meeting, and the majority in Norwood, the majority do participate in town meeting. We roughly get about 200 of our town meeting members that come. One of the things that has helped us is adopting electronic voting. And that's one of the things, by the way, that people like about town meeting. They also like the fact of representative town meeting. In our case, we have all our rules are part of our bylaws. So it's very clear how to participate. It's very clear how to be part of the process for town meeting. We also enable any registered voter in the town of Norwood can speak at town meeting. And you asked the question of how everyone can participate, and that frequently happens. We also happen to have in our town what we call a registered speaker process. It's actually written into our rules and the bylaws. And that's where, in advance of town meeting, you can reach out to the moderator and say, I want to speak on this particular article, and you are guaranteed the right to speak. No one can move the question prior to all the registered speakers speaking. And that includes registered voters of the town as well. So I think that has been a bit of a game changer for to increase participation in town meeting. One of the things that we have done is we have started information sessions. I know a lot of other towns do it. They'll do it for open town meeting as well. Ours are open to everyone, and we break up the warrant before the meeting, a couple of weeks before, and actually have info sessions. Not a debate. And trust me, I sit there as a moderator and make sure debate does not occur in the info session. But it's one of the things that has actually helped educate our town meeting members and our townspeople. And it also has made the meeting run a lot more efficiently because questions can be addressed beforehand, and we try to stick to debate.
Good. So do you get strong attendance at those? Are they like, can you watch them on Zoom or on TV as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
So to Mark's point, they're live, they're carried live on the local cable stations. We also record them, and you can pick them up from the town website and also watch on YouTube.
Great. Thank you. So that leads us to a question for Bill about what did Ludlow want to accomplish by changing to a town council? And this is so we have in municipal government council, a group of people meeting together, and counsel, an attorney, and very often the way we speak, they sound the same. So in this case, we are talking about the town council, a group of people. So what did Ludlow want to accomplish by changing to a town council, and what was the push to make the change?
Like everyone else, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I know this was, as I had alluded with Pat earlier, Pat Lloyd, is that Pat and I spent about a little over a year together in the neighborhood of 28 meetings during the charter drafting of a charter. Really, when you look at it, the town of Ludlow, we have 10 boards across one line. We have town meeting, representative town meeting, and then everything below that, there's 10 lines, and that puts the Board of Selectmen on that line. And we changed it to select board. That the select board is now one of 10 boards across the same line. We find that when you have a meeting every 2 weeks and you push something to another board that's 2 weeks, a lot of things would get kicked down the road a little bit. It took a lot of time to get things done. This is actually the second time that a charter had been proposed in town in the last, I think it's 12 to 15 years. And both times they did not pass. The town itself, when you really go to representative town meeting, and we have 90 elected precinct members from six precincts. So we have 15 members per precinct of six precincts. Also part of the push for it was because of participation. There are times that we were coming close to not even having a quorum. So that would be an issue for us. And I believe even during COVID, we dropped the quorum number, obviously because of the ability to meet in person. Pardon me. But it really came as that people thought, and I believe it too, is that the system is antiquated. When you look at it across the Commonwealth, I think the number is 292 that you have of town meetings. 260 are open and 32 are representative. We are the only part of the country that still does this at this point. The town felt it's antiquated, and of course, as you always know, is that when it comes to politics in general, everybody likes to say drain the swamp or anything like that, as they think that it could be a lot better. But as I always say, is that the select board itself, we wanted to go to town council with town manager with 7 town council members. And the town council would have been replacing the select board. The town council is replacing town meeting. And Pat, you could jump in if I'm wrong, but they were replacing town meeting. A lot of people felt that was not a good idea because they felt now that they're making the decisions of 90 people. Again, it came to a lot of participation for our town, and it just took forever to get things done. And the last time they did it, I believe they wanted to do mayor. That did not pass. But the push to make the change really gets to the point of being able to move government a little bit faster. When we were making it in the charter, when we wrote it, and that's probably in the question later on, but the idea that we had is that right now, representative town meeting, when you really sit there and think about it, you're getting the warrant 2 weeks before the meeting starts. And when you come to May, that's budget season. Those town meeting members literally would get that budget 2 weeks before they have to vote on it. I don't think that's enough time myself. When we were going to go into a manager council forum, we were going to actually open it up to 3 possible open meetings of the budget to the general public to get any participation or any ideas. So the forum that we were going to was actually opening up participation to the whole voters, the voters in general. We have about 16,000 registered voters. The statement I like to say, especially as the select board in Ludlow, is that we have all the responsibility but no authority, because really all we are licensed. We sign the licenses to the town, but everyone looks to us to think that we are the ones that make all the decisions, and when we really don't. I mean, when you really think about all the other things that go on in town. I agree, and just so you know, is that we had 11 people on that committee, and that committee, we came to a consensus on the charter, but there are things that we all could have gone another way with, so we did it as a consensus, and I think Pat can attest to it. We worked very well. We did have some sticking points, but we all worked very well together, and it was a very diverse committee. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, that helps. But now we are gonna ask to tell us a little bit more about describing or defining what town council, the group, is, because I think most of at least within our league area, we are all open town meetings, so town council is not something that we're particularly familiar with. And how many towns actually use this form, and what are the trends that you're seeing in town governance, I guess, in general, in Massachusetts?
Well, thank you for having me and for the introduction. I want to clarify, I'm no longer a town meeting representative, but I served for about 15 years and I have a great appreciation for both open and representative town meeting. But tonight I want to provide a little information about council forms of government. So I'm going to share a couple of slides, and you can tell me if I accidentally am sharing the wrong material. Let's see. Okay. First of all, there are 260 open town meetings, 32 representatives town meetings, and 260 sounds like a large number. Keep in mind that about 190 towns haven't reached the threshold of 600 to move to another form of 6,000, excuse me, to move to another form of government. As for town council falls on what we call a city form of government, even though it continues to be called a town. And that means that rather than a town meeting, the legislative function is performed by a council. There are really three types of council forms of government: council mayor, which has 44 cities, council manager, which has 12 cities, and a hybrid situation, which we call council manager mayor. And in this third situation, it's really a council manager form of government, but the president of the council is called a mayor and is not independently elected. And they do not serve the traditional mayor role. It's more of a being a head of state type of role. As we show, about 74% of all municipalities in Massachusetts are open town meeting, and that represents about 33% of the population. As for councils, the council manager, council mayor, those make up obviously the rest of it. And mayor councils actually have the largest amount of population, even though there aren't as many there are only 13% of the municipalities. For cities council manager form, there has to be, to move to a council form of government, there need to be at least 12,000 residents. And as I mentioned, if there's under 6,000, you must stay an open town meeting form of government. Anything over 6,000, you could also participate in a representative town meeting. Under the city manager form of government, the city manager becomes the chief executive officer of the city. This replaces the select board. They're appointed by the city council, manage day-to-day operations, appoints and manages subordinate officers, and submits the budget to city council. In contrast, the council is the legislative body. So many times when there's a shift from town meeting to town council, it's important to understand that these are not the same. The Board of Selectmen does not become the council. Rather, the town meeting is actually becoming the council and takes the legislative role in the town. They usually meet weekly or twice a month, which is in contrast to once or twice a year. This means that councils are perpetually looking at issues all year and discussing them rather than waiting for once or twice a year. It also results in a different type of budgeting calendar, but that's a little beyond our purview for tonight. The council approves or rejects budgets, approves appropriation, adopts zoning ordinances, and sometimes the council president is on the school committee as well. I'm going to take a second to talk about mayor council form of government. I think when you hear town council in general, most people think about a town manager council and not a mayor. But if you had a mayor council form, the mayor becomes the chief executive rather than a city manager or the select board. The council keeps relatively the same role. Just some areas of confusion. Cities can keep the title of town even if they've become technically a city form of government. We have some towns that are the city known as the town of. And also, as we mentioned, some cities use the term mayor for the president of the city council. But in this case, the mayor does not act as the chief executive involved with the day-to-day operations of the town. This is more like a head of state position. In general, the size of a city or town, other than once you've met the threshold, it doesn't determine the form of government. It's very much varied. There are cities as small as 12,000, which is North Adams, and towns that are as large as Brookline with 63,000 residents. That doesn't mean they're not in a constant state of flux and considering other changes of government, but the size is definitely not something that necessarily causes towns to move to another form of government. There are several cities that have plans form of government rather than charters, and this pre-exists. It goes back to before the first half of the century. Those forms are no longer available, but some cities and towns still operate under those forms of government. Just to talk about some, let's see here, trends going forward. There has definitely been a gradual movement of towns changing to a city form of government. Every few years, another changes. There's not a similar movement back in the other direction, back to representative or open town meeting once they've become a city. I think one city changed back, but they were right on the threshold for 6,000, and they had been a representative town meeting and changed back to an open town meeting. But there has not been a change going from city and town back to town meeting. There's no recent examples of towns changing from open town meeting to representative town meeting. I think it might have been Chelsea back in 1989 or so that has changed from open town to representative town meeting. But what we're seeing is that in most cases, when town meeting no longer serves the town, it moves into a council form of government rather than taking the intermediate step of becoming a representative town meeting. And within any town or city form of government, what we're seeing is really a trend towards centralization of authority under the town manager or the city manager and giving them more authority with a reduction of elected position. This comes along with a lot of professionalization of the staff and as well as some recognition that volunteerism in some of these volunteer boards and committees doesn't always provide for the level of professionalism that's required with today's regulations and laws that have to be followed in order to accompany the good governance and best practices. So those are the end of my comments. But as we go along, when we have our other questions, we'll definitely chime in.
Great, thank you. So I'm seeing several questions from people that might make sense to just address right now because they do relate to your particular meetings. So some people are wondering, Mark, how long you said you take care of your business in one night, and I think some people are astounded by that fact, that you allow you allow remote participation. How many people on average attend remotely, and how many choose to speak? And then what actually, let me see where that go. Something about how do you, what are your norms? How do you set the so that you're done in one night with
Yeah, it's all about preparation and expectation. A great deal of the determination as to whether a meeting is fair and open and efficient. And I say that in that order. It's much more important to be fair and open than it is efficient. Very easy to be efficient if you're not fair and open. But notwithstanding that, a great deal of it relates around the skill of the moderator, who I believe is an important factor. We all have different styles. There's no correct way to be a moderator, but the job is to get the community, the gathered folks, to a decision, and command of the venue is truly vital. In North Andover, I uniquely create the rules of parliamentary procedure for every town meeting. They're not a matter of bylaw. So I craft them for the specific meeting in terms of being able to get to a judgment if we have a hot topic, if you will. Folks are not allowed to vote on a remote basis. I proposed the notion now 10 years ago, maybe a dozen years ago, where one can ask a question either by text or email or by a telephone call that's taken by, thankfully, a League of Women Voters group of volunteers who man our, wrong word, I guess, who command our remote participation exercise and desk. The obligation is getting to a good judgment, not how long the discussion happens to be. It's the measure ought to be, are we making good judgments? And the community has been tempered to expect, frankly, that Mark DeSalvo is going to run a meeting that allows us to get to a good judgment and do it in one evening, no matter how contentious, no matter how many people happen to be in the room, and no matter the number of warrant items or articles that are on the warrant.
And just because I think some people might wonder, how long have you been moderator?
I've been moderator for 13 years now.
So yeah, it takes a minute to get up to speed on some of those things, and I definitely appreciate that. And then there were a couple of questions related to representative town meeting, wondering if both voters and the members can speak, how many days does it last on average? And the fact that not all the members show up, what do the folks that elected the people who don't show up, what do they think? And do the members actually reach out or communicate with the people who elected them about the issues?
All right, so let me unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a few.
And I'm not going to take credit as the moderator for this because unlike Mark, I've only been doing this for 3 years now, and I'm still learning. But one of the things that we have done is these info sessions and the outreach to representative town meetings in order to not turn a town meeting into a question and answer session, but more into a discussion of the issues. And even with enabling registered voters, again, town meeting, the flow of town meeting, we do have the registered speaker process. And if it's a hot topic, we could be up to 50 registered speakers, but there's also a time limit. There's a 5-minute time limit. And also what I do and my predecessor did beforehand, me probably a little bit more, is, if people are just reiterating the same thing over and over again, and Mark, you probably do this as well, I ask them to move it along. The body itself tends to self-regulate around when they're ready to vote. And again, I never know. There are a couple of people who will always move the question, but I have been thrown off many a time by calling on someone and finding out that they're actually moving the question, and the 2/3 vote goes, and we're off to the races. So our average annual and special town meeting, and we do 3 sessions of town meeting a year also, by the way, which is a little different. We instituted this a few years ago. We actually in the winter do our zoning bylaws all in one town meeting that's separate from annual or the fall special. So we have a cadence of meeting special in the fall, zoning and real estate related in the winter, and then our annual, and there's at least one special. We typically go 2 nights. I would marvel if we could do it in one, but the reality is there's always a hot topic. And that that is one of the things that happens there. But I think again, kind of changing thing. The other thing that has created a lot of efficiency for us, and we've only instituted it last year, was electronic voting. Participation, the names and contact information for all our town meeting members, it's published on the town website, along with their attendance and the voting records. And again, this is representative town meeting, so it should be that way. The townspeople, people in their particular districts are well aware of who's there and who's not there, and they're not shy about it. That was one of the reasons that we just lowered the number, because again, going from 1.5% of registered voters to 1.25%, we were finding we were getting a critical mass around that 200 and people actually running for town meeting. So that was another thing that we instituted, which was well received in order to ensure participation.
Thank you. Here's a quick question just for clarification from Bill. You said something about Ludlow has 10 boards on the same line. What does that mean?
It pretty much means the organizational chart, meaning that at the top is town meeting, but then below that you have Board of Assessors, Planning Board, Housing Authority, Recreation Committee, Library Board of Trustees, then the Board of Selectmen, Town Moderator, School Committee, Board of Health, and the Town Clerk. So when you sit there and, this is how things are moving, so there really isn't the authority falls on really town meeting. And I was scrolling through the questions too, and I just wanted to add is that the biggest thing that nowadays, so we're about 20 to 21,000. We might have just dipped below 20, I'm not sure, residents. But when you really think about it, the thing that concerns me when it comes to town meetings is when you get a group of people, a very small group of people, that go ahead and have not an agenda, kind of an agenda, but they don't like something. And what happens is, are these precinct members, are they actually reaching out to 100, 200 of the people that are in their precinct and actually asking their opinions? Because I've found it in ours, I know for a fact that they're not. So it becomes tough to me to be able to sit there. Is that I had someone come up to me after we had the meeting with and the charter was defeated, and they said, well, this is the purest form of democracy. I go, this is not the purest form of democracy. The purest form of democracy, which is probably closer to open town meeting, is that decisions are made by the electorate. They're not made by representatives of the electorate. So my question is, when they're making decisions, are they going out and are they asking these people what they really think? So like with the council members, now they act as those people, but they're held accountable. They're voted in and out. They're meeting twice, sometimes two, sometimes three times. During COVID, our board met every week for a year and a half. At first we were remote for a little while, and then we met in person. So sorry I got off on that, but it's meaning one line just means it's town meeting, and then you have all these 10 boards across one line, meaning no one really has. Does the select board have authority over the recreation committee? Not really. Thank you.
So it's referring to your organization chart and how, yeah, I think we got that. Great, thank you. There's more questions, but I do want to go ahead and move on to our next area, which is, are there constraints or limitations on town meeting and town government, town governance participation? Are the constraints or limitations on town meeting and town governance participation reasonable from the perspective of a true open democracy? How easy should it be? And do you, each of you in your own experience, have you had or know of successful efforts to engage those who may not be aware of the opportunities to participate? And this could include people who are renters, people who don't speak English or don't speak with confidence, have mobility issues, transportation needs, visual or hearing impairments, or others. So, Mark, we'll go back to you and
So, a loaded question, but I expect that expanded enfranchisement as a means of participation and actually having authority to vote in this political environment is a non-starter. I have a personal experience with this. My own daughter led an effort as a teenager to extend vote in town meeting to 16-year-olds, and it was defeated in my own town meeting. And while some other communities have put home rule petitions to move forward with that, it's not made any progress in the legislature at all. I suspect that that is the more likely of the categories that you've suggested that may become a local option opportunity and be afforded well before non-citizens are given the opportunity to vote.
you. Jerry.
Yeah, I think that one could argue that representative town meeting is because it is a limited number of people who can vote, not not the most democratic, but on the other hand, they are elected by the voters. Our town clerk does a really good job of making sure that the districts are equal, and redistricting does occur, especially when the census comes around, to make sure that there's an even population, if you will. You never want to be that town meeting member who finds out you have to go run in another district because you've been redistricted, but that's the name of the game. As far as accommodations go, we have addressed accommodations for hearing impaired with devices. Visually impaired, we are trying to get better at that. And again, with the language, the town has an initiative going on about that as well. But I do think that I would love to hear about. We've done a lot of outreach to get people to run. The League of Women Voters has been pretty key in that, and a couple of our select board members have taken it upon themselves to go out when we have Norwood Day and around town to get people to participate and put their hat in the ring. And again, the fact that anyone can come to town meeting and speak, we try to reemphasize that over and over again so people are aware.
Mark, you had another comment.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm delighted that Jerry made the notion about accommodation. That's really, really important. And I'd also suggest that remote participation, that meaning full availability of remote participation, being able to be distant and vote, is a right under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And as the ADA, there's a requirement to provide reasonable accommodation. And thus far, even in several open town meetings, our Attorney General has not objected to the communities that have extended this courtesy to others. It's a truly slippery slope if you're going to have dozens and hundreds of people in that role, but certainly an accommodation for somebody who legitimately doesn't have the opportunity to come to the meeting. I'd only add one other thing. It's a really important transformation when somebody at an open town meeting comes as a citizen, they are turned into legislators. And my obligation is to teach them and inform them about that difference, that they are nothing more, maybe importantly more, than representatives of the community at large who are replacing their good and considered judgment after a deliberative process so that the community can come to a good judgment. And it may be a determination that has generational consequence.
Thank you. I will point out that we last year in Acton did have, I believe, 2 voters who participated remotely. They had to contact the clerk's office, at least the day, I don't know how long the period was. It was the day of, the day before, because we meet in the evening, so there was time. And a staff person was on Zoom with them. They could see what was happening because they were tapped into our video. And in fact, one of the people did speak and she was on screen so people could see her. But this is not, it's really for somebody who cannot leave their home or enter the building for whatever reason, generally health related. It's not just, oh, I'm on crutches this week because I broke my foot. It's not that. It's got to be something much more confining than that. And I see that Bill has his hand up here.
Yes, thank you. No, I just wanted to go back to something that Jerry had said, and I do agree with her. But I've also, in the same sense, when you look at people that are in representative town meeting that have been elected by people to represent them, if you really drill down on some of the numbers, and I did it in our town, I noticed that 15% of our precinct members were write-in candidates, and more than a large percentage of them were written in by less than 5 signatures, and also most of that percentage was written in by one person, which to that point is, and I'm not poo-pooing anything you're saying, Jerry, but that's the part that kind of gets me, is that you get the people that, and when you come back to the participation aspect of it, I mean, we have one precinct that has 5 people, 5 seats open. We have another one, and then 3 out of the 6 are full. But it's tough is that sometimes we see that, and someone that came up to me, and the same person that said purest form of democracy, and I said, not really. And they go, well, yes, it is. I go, the purest form of democracy is that you actually were a write-in candidate and you were the only one that wrote yourself in. So to me, that's the tough part of it. How do you monitor that? I mean, do you have to have a certain number of write-ins to be able to get in? I don't know. But, there's got to be some kind of way to tighten it up. And the biggest thing is, I won't have a problem with representative town meeting if people are held accountable to showing up to town meeting. If we have 90 elected people, or all seats are full and we have 90 elected people and 86 show up, or even 80, I'm good with that. Things happen with people, and to your point also, Joanne, is that I might not be able to make it because of a certain reason, and I'll do it remotely. But that's the only comment I had about that, because I've seen that a lot. And again, like everyone has said, I was a town meeting member because of something I wanted to, be able to vote on, and I did it for a few years, and then I became a selectman. So that's just the one thing I see about representative town meeting that is another reason that I'm not the biggest fan of it. If people participate and show up, then that's fine.
So Joanne, can I just address that real quick? So Bill, I don't disagree with you, which is one of the reasons why we formed a committee. So we have a rules committee, but we also formed a separate, our selectmen put a committee in place when we actually by statute would have had to raise the number of town meeting members. So we've done an extreme amount of study. You're absolutely right. The next step is to prevent, we wanted to make sure that we had a number that the warrant would be full. And I'm really happy to report we just closed nomination papers yesterday, and we're going to have a number of races for town meeting seats in districts, which is awesome. You are absolutely right. The next step for us is kind of the preventative. Don't let somebody have, just because they have one write-in vote and there's a space they get in. The other thing that is new for us is publishing attendance, which we never did before. And that was something that, along with electronic voting, I campaigned on that, if you will, on electronic voting and publishing attendance. So now what we're trying to do is get the local paper to actually put it in the paper. It's up on the town website. So again, there's more and more pressure being put on. It's and don't take me wrong, it's not date night for a couple of people, for people to who've been doing this for 30 years who never show up. It's, you should be doing it because you're going to participate.
I do want to get on to what I know is a burning topic amongst many people. There have been a few bills filed this session. Some of them have been refiled to allow remote or hybrid participation in open meetings at the town level, which would include both representative and open town meeting. As many people probably know, during COVID, representative town meeting could take place remotely, but not open town meeting. So for each of you, what do you see as the opportunities and challenge, or both opportunities and challenges, if any of these bills? I went through, and there's some overlap, definitely. I think in the end, there would be some combination if it did pass. It has not thus far. You have no idea what the chances are, but what do you see as the opportunities and challenges if this were enacted? And I wonder, Pat, if you have some overview, some big picture thoughts on how that might look.
Well, it's interesting because there are a few competing bills out there. Some of the positions taken is that remote or hybrid participation in open town meetings, including as well as other open meetings, would be required of all cities and towns, and others that would merely extend it so that it would be an option, but not necessarily required. And there are really pros and cons on both sides. The concern about requiring remote or hybrid participation in all meetings, including open town meetings, tends to center around the cost of doing so, and concerns about smaller towns or areas where there's poor internet service, the extra added burden of those costs, both for the town and for people who want to participate but may not have the means to participate remotely. So that's on one side. On the other hand, many are taking the view that this is just something that we need to start doing, both to make sure that everyone can be accommodated to participate without having to go through the barriers of contacting someone, for example, if they can't attend for reasons of disability or other matter. Or, this would help break down the barriers that of the economic barriers, the childcare barriers, to require open meetings. The other situation we need to keep in mind is that as opposed to, for example, select board meetings or other school committee meetings, when you're talking about an open town meeting, there's a vote taken. So the technology, apparently, and Diane just mentioned that Wayland is working on this technology. The technology is not quite there yet to allow an open town meeting vote, to, verify voters and making sure that they're registered voters and that the person who is voting is actually that person, but that technology is moving forward. So that may be less of a barrier in the future. So, we'll see what the legislature does. There may be some combination of this. It may be a requirement for certain meetings to be held remotely or as a hybrid meeting, but not all of them to kind of deal with this financial burden.
Thank you. Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
So I come from a large town. North Andover happens to be the second largest community in the Commonwealth with an open town meeting. The largest community in the Commonwealth is my younger sister, the town of Andover, next door. And we have the privilege of, one of the reasons I can run an efficient town meeting in one evening is we have strong professional staff, well-regarded town managers through the course of years who do a good job of preparing the foundational documents and information for those people who come to town meeting. Remote participation, even remote participation, allowing people to vote is something that my town could handle even today because we have the resources, the technical skill, and staff that exists. However, legislating should not necessarily be easy. Legislating should not be an election, that you want people to be deliberative. I like to say that deliberative participatory democracy is our shibboleth. An engagement in the community that will be specific and circumstantial to the issue of the moment is the most important part. We should judge the results of an open town meeting by the judgment made, not by the number of people who happen to be attending.
Thank you. And I think I'm scrolling through the questions here, and I think that addressed some of the concerns that people have brought up. Did anyone else want to chime in on the?
Let me jump in because we had one remote hybrid meeting during COVID, which we were allowed to do from representative town meeting, and we hired a consultant. I want to tell you, I would not be a fan because of the difficulties that people had dealing with the technology, dealing with how to be recognized, how to adjust the fairness. So, we have the ability to do it as well, Mark. I totally agree with you. It is not all that it was cracked up to be. And this is with representative town meeting that our members resoundingly said, yeah, no, unless someone needs an accommodation. This is not for us. They felt it defeated the purpose of town meeting and the openness of town meeting, even in representative town meeting.
Thank you. Getting up to time. So I would like to get to some of the questions that folks have here before we finish up here. There was, do town council members earn a salary? How are they different from an elected volunteer select board?
I can answer that one.
Okay.
So
and the person also is wondering if it is a more expensive alternative to a mostly volunteer government, but go ahead, Bill.
So when we drafted our charter, basically, and I remember Pat is the guts are in your bylaws. The charter is really your outline. When we were drafting our charter, we basically said that, you know, obviously the first thing to do is if it passes, then we need to do elections for town council. What we were going to do is we were going to keep the salaries the same for most likely a year until it was something down the road. We were going to address it later as maybe a bylaw, I believe. But that is something to consider, is because, I mean, I'll tell you straight up, I take home $300 a month, and and anyone that's sitting here right now knows that the amount of work that goes on to doing what you do is well beyond that, because you're sitting at work and your phone's blowing up, your email's blowing up, the town manager's calling, everything, you know, it goes all day. There would be probably most likely a higher salary. I mean, I would say we didn't really discuss it, but the number that come up is that if we're in the neighborhood of $5,000 for a select board member, and maybe about 6,500 or 7 for the chairperson, we're gonna float around 10. So that's the thing, though, is until you get into it and you really, and I think that's something that Pat could speak more to, is that eventually there's probably, you got to weigh the cost between, now you got a town manager, what's the price of what's the cost of the town manager versus 7 council members. Now, are you eliminating town meetings, which now there's a cost to that by putting out the warrant and things of that nature. So there are cost differences. You kind of have to weigh it, but there might be an increase. I would think there'd be a small increase, but it depends on all the expenses.
Thanks. There was another question. Does a city manager need to be a resident of the city? And how are the council members elected, and what is their typical term?
Yeah, I can answer that one too, because since
one.
we wrote our charter, what we had done is that we said, obviously we have 5 select board members, and what we were going to do is basically there'd be a new election. And what we had come up with, it was kind of, I guess it's been done before, but it was something I said, is that, you know, depending on how many people go, we might have a primary first. If we get 15 people, that would be the threshold to have a primary to bring it down to a smaller number. But say you only have 9 or 10 that run for 7 positions, the top vote getter would hold a 3-year term. The top 1 or 2 or 3 vote getters would hold a 3-year term. The next couple would be a 2-year term, and if someone who came in at the 7th was 7th on the list, would have a 1-year term. But what this also does is get you into a staggered way of rotating your council instead of running 7 people at once. What was the other part of that question?
Whether the city manager needs to be a resident.
Was that it?
I think that was.
Well, town manager, we did not. We
I think
didn't
would
have it
vary
as
by
a
the city.
Yeah, we didn't have a requirement for our charter, because obviously, you know, in a community of 20,000 people, are you going to have the right person that actually meets the requirements of this position? It's a professional position. You know, I look at mayor as more political. It's, you know, who do you know? So we had allowed it, but we also left that up to the count, because the first thing that would happen is once the charter does, then you go to an election for council members. First active duty for the council would be to draft the job description and the posting for a town manager or city manager. But at that point, then city manager, I would think that might be more of a resident, but town manager, your pool gets narrowed down, and you want your best candidates.
Sure. So here's a question. Oh, Pat, yes, go ahead.
Just quickly, I wanted to add, there was one more question, and that was about terms. And for council members, there's really no cookie cutter approach. Cities and towns get to choose what they want. Most council members are either 2 or 3-year terms. There's a couple who've been moved to 4 years to give them a little more time to get their feet under them before the next election. And As far as city managers and their residencies, as Bill said, that can be chosen per city or town as well. However, I think the trend and best practice is to not make it a requirement of the position that the position be a resident in order to attract the best pool of candidates, although it certainly can be considered in the process.
Thank you. There is a question, and I know people ask this frequently, and we are nearing what we were thinking was our time limit. So hopefully we'll get to all the questions. But do any open town meeting towns separate the deliberative session from a voting session so people can vote in person without attending the debate? And the answer to that is no. That is another thing. It's not town meeting. It's another, I think they do it in New Hampshire, or they have the
Right.
option to do it in New Hampshire. And I believe what has been found out is very few people go to a session where you can't vote. So no, and that's part of the remote and hybrid participation question as well. Does either moderator run informational meetings before town meeting, which you do? Or do they rely on other public meetings to inform the citizenry? It's probably both. Because there's always a ton of meetings going on leading up to town meeting. Whoops, oh, hit the wrong thing. How can a town get to a place to seriously examine whether to change to representative town meeting? You have to have enough people who are interested and want to do the work to look into the charter and stuff. Has any town meeting voted itself out of existence, presumably by voting to file a home rule petition to create a town council? Or has only occurred when an elected charter commission submits such a charter change for approval by the voters? I think some town meetings have, or a couple. Go ahead, Pat.
I would say a couple have. I think that there really has to be a galvanizing issue that makes people feel that their town meeting is no longer working in order for it to go through that format. Sometimes there's agreement, sometimes there's not. It's possible either way. It's also true that sometimes it takes more than one effort. I think Amherst went through 3 committees and commissions before they made the change. So it sometimes just requires a little bit of momentum.
Right, just like with a lot of things that towns might consider, and I think we have answered. This one person has concerns, obviously, about the ability of many people to participate for all the reasons that we know. Under current law, are there any options that could be widely and realistically offered? And I would say the widely part, not so much, to allow folks who have difficulty participating. And really granted, what is the best way to mitigate this inequity in the form of government? Well, the bills are filed. Speak to your legislators, see if there's support in your town for changing what to something that you more closely want to see, without abandoning this form of government. Yeah, it would have to be through the legislature at this point. Did you come across arguments or momentum for moving more decisions from open town meeting to the local election? I don't think so. Oh, here's one for Mark. So what ideas can you share for a town that has low town meeting attendance and occasionally a very poor decision that results in an almost irrational deliberation? I'm sorry. We all know of different meetings that have gone not the way we had hoped.
That's in the eye of the beholder, of course, but making the meeting, having some expectation about what will happen at the meeting, that it will be deliberative, that there will be fairness offered, that You're not going to listen to the same three people 12 times drone for 12 minutes each. There's a comfort factor that's necessary in order for it to be an inviting experience. The thing that I have learned are two that are most important. Number one, that information is made available, whether that's about the specific hot button issue of the moment, and that's done by the varying boards themselves, or that in my case, I am frequently providing information in English about what each warrant article means, and providing it over the course of to the community at large through the town's website and in mail that goes out to people. And then number two, this is really the most important part, making sure that the people who attend the meeting recognize their import, that their role actually has real consequence, that you might have walked in the door with a specific opinion, but your obligation is to listen to the deliberative part of the meeting and then make a considered judgment. I reject the notion that attendance alone is the metric of measurement. I wholly reject that. There's a lot of academic survey research that suggests that it's rather clear that a few hundred people in a town my size, for instance, 32,000 people, is a reasonably good random sample of a few hundred, is fully representative of the opinion of the general populace. The measure is not in how many people, but the quality of that judgment made. We have school boards and select boards selected by fewer people that attend many of my own town meetings, and they're never questioned about the legitimacy of their decision making. Why doubt the opinion of a considered group of town meeting members who truly listen and debate and make considered judgments?
Thank you. A couple other questions. If you want to allow disabled citizens to participate remotely, how do you police it? And it's not, do we want to, we must. And they deal with the town clerk. And the clerk takes care of all of that and whatever process needs to happen. And they would be a registered voter, certainly, and whatever other qualifications they must determine, that is between them and the clerk. And if you want to complete your meeting in one day, how do you limit speakers? Well, what I do is put a time limit. And hopefully, I think as Mark might have alluded to, if somebody has spoken already, make sure any other person who wishes to speak has had the opportunity. And once time limits become familiar to people, they usually are pretty good about keeping to it. With open town meeting, do you not find blocks of people coming for one specific issue? Yes, you do. I assume that's the same for you, Mark.
Yeah, people come, they look to massage a specific issue, whether it's a school budget or a zoning issue, whatever it might be. I'll be respectful to them and recognize that if we're talking about the budget as an example, we have a particular hot button issue. I'll do a couple of things that might be different than most other towns. I'll establish a set of common facts. I'd invite two people, say a planning board issue, people on the opposite side of an issue, to present at the front of the meeting when we're talking about that warrant article, the common set of facts. And I will not brook any commentary or question about those common set of facts. I'll then move to a part of the meeting where we'll only accept questions, not statements of opinion at the moment, and hope that that exhausts some of the tenor and heat out there, but at the same time informs the population, and then only go to statements of interest that are often just people lobbying and feeling a need to express their own opinion. They're not often the most informative of circumstances, but there were, as I suggested a little bit earlier, that opportunity, whether it's a remote question from outside the room or inside the room, the majesty of somebody's query totally changing the tenor of where the room is going. That's the joy of a deliberative participatory democracy.
Exactly. And I think we'll finish up with one more question for Jerry about representative town meeting, and then perhaps do a quick round of any closing thoughts that anyone has. So a person is wondering if representative town meeting members are subject to the quote abuse that other elected and appointed members experience, you know, the nasty emails and stuff like that.
I can tell you the moderator is, but so look, the reality is this: you are an elected official, and there's always going to be somebody out there who may via social media more lightly, or via sending an email, whatever, that is going to express something in a disrespectful or a non-dignified, contemptuous way. But for the most part, I think our representative town meeting members have found, although they are elected officials, that they are not subject to the fan mail, if you will, that comes to our Board of Selectmen or school committee members, because of the numbers. But I want to emphasize, and I'll use this as my closing thought too. I recently had a member come to me and who was unhappy about the fact that we were publishing electronic voting results and doing it by name. And I had to remind this gentleman that you are a representative town meeting member, which means you are elected and you are an elected official. And with that comes the responsibility, and the people you represent should know what you are doing or what you're not doing. So to me, that's the beauty of representative town meeting. It's the oldest form of government we have here, town meeting, but it is also when representation for every district, and there is a responsibility that you have as a representative town meeting member, which I kind of like.
Thank you. Yeah, any closing thoughts? No pressure, but just in case.
I just want to reiterate that there's no one perfect way of forming a local government. There are many options. Even among the forms of government, there are several opportunities to bring them together and closer. There are opportunities in council manager forms of government to have public participation processes that are very similar to town meeting without the vote, town forums, and there's ways to make things happen under every form of government.
Thank you. Bill, any final word?
Sure. Again, thank you. When I first went to college, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer and I wanted to learn government, and I fell asleep in class the first day, and look where I am now. I mean, I enjoy this. I enjoy it because, as Mark says, is that it's kind of like voting. It's something that you've earned, and it's something that, be involved. And I've always said to people that I do what's best for Ludlow, and I try to stay true to every one of them. So there was one question you had here for me, which I think would be a good one to finish up with, is why do you think the vote failed in Ludlow? When you go to town meeting and you ask them to fire themselves, it's kind of a tough one. So, but also now, like I said, this was our second try at it. I think that as Pat was saying, there's no cookie cutter fit. I think that we've learned from the first one, we've learned from this one. The other thing is that we were going away from mostly elected to mostly appointed. I wasn't going to die on that hill, because if there had been an amendment on the floor to change it back to elected, I would have said yes. The other thing that was contentious was the fact of having either the president of the town council be a member of the school committee. Because, I mean, let's face it, in most communities, that can be a contentious relationship. Is it's because you have school departments that have upwards of anywhere from 40 to 45% of your budget, and their laws are different. So, you know, when you ask questions, you always seem to get the runaround, but you're only asking questions because in our position, we're looking at the budget as a whole, not just one budget. So I think that part of it was a little bit, people didn't like that. In the same sense, I would have said, you know what, if we don't want to do that, then we don't need to do it. So I think the one thing is that if you do think about a change of government at any time, you might not get it right the first time. We actually had 3 minutes before every meeting, and you were allowed for public comment, and you were also allowed to come into our meetings and watch our meetings. And you were also able to send emails, Facebook page. We did everything for any possible public comment. We held about 27 or 28 meetings. We had no one come into a meeting except for 3 people who sat there every meeting because they were so intrigued by it. And we got about 3 emails and no input from anybody until it came down time to vote on it at town meeting. And then that's when the pitchforks and the torches came out. But we always said you had the opportunity to put in your input, and no one did. If I told several people, if you would come in and talk, we would have listened to you, and you might have said something that made us think, well, you know what, you're right. So, but in the end, as a select board member, it is our current form of government. I respect the vote that they made. They did the vote. So to that point, the form of government at this time spoke, and I adhere to that. And so that's how it is. So I think you'll get it right if you change it. If you try to change it, it might take a couple times, but again, it took a little over a year for us to go through the charter process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Allow me to suggest that every community will find the self-governance that's right for them eventually.
Mhm.
Not
Yeah.
unlike our nation 250 years ago, as we're celebrating this and next year, the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. Town meeting was a spark to the American Revolution, and we need to recognize that. And while Thomas Jefferson thought that town meeting is the perfect exercise of self-government, we need to keep it. And that's our challenge right now.
Thank you. And thank you all. I am going to turn this back to Diane, but I will remind this whole conversation has reminded me of one of the watchwords of the League of Women Voters, and perhaps many other people, is democracy is not a spectator sport. So I think we re-emphasized that this evening, and hope that it will spark thought and conversation amongst the viewers who have seen tonight's presentation. And thank you all. And I will now turn it back to Diane for finishing this up.
Thank you, Joanne. I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen really quickly so we can share with you some links. If you can all see that. I want to thank our panelists for sharing your expertise with us, and Joanne Barry for moderating. I also want to publicly acknowledge the town meeting report study committee from the Acton Area League. I want to recognize them for their dedication to this work, and to the members of the planning committee for this event, Marilyn Peterson, Marianne Ashton, Jeannie Vineyard, Joanne Barry, John Sonner, and to Lori Cooney and Alyssa Robinson and Phyllis Mead for their feedback and support throughout the process. And most importantly, thank you attendees for coming, and have a great night.